There are men who are wrong often and know it. There are men who are wrong rarely and cannot bear it. Edmund Farrell, the Duke of Graving, belonged to the second kind, and I say this as the man who has known him since we were 17, who has managed his estate affairs for 11 years, and who watched, with a combination of professional alarm and private amusement, the entire course of what I shall call the education of a duke. I should tell you what Graving Hall is, so you can understand what it meant to work there, and what it meant to leave. It sits at the northern edge of an invented country, a vast, cold-stoned house on the Northumberland moors, all high windows and gray light and rooms that echo. The hall has 42 rooms, 9 of which are heated in winter and the rest of which are kept closed as a concession to practicality. The grounds run to 800 acres. The village of Alderwick sits 3 miles south along a road that turns to slick mud in November and does not recover until April. Edmund's grandmother had planted roses along the south wall that no one had touched since her death, and they had grown into a magnificent, unpruned tangle that the gardeners refused to address on principle. They called it the Duchess's garden and left it alone. Edmund called it an embarrassment and also left it alone. Some things at Graving were like that. Edmund himself was 38 when this story began, tall, dark-coated, precise in the way that men become precise when they have been running large concerns since the age of 24. He did not waste words. He did not waste warmth, either, though I had seen him give it, once or twice in very quiet moments, to the tenant's youngest child when she fell in the yard, to his aunt on the anniversary of his uncle's death, to the old retriever who slept under his writing desk and tracked mud on the reports. To people who deserved it, he was capable of extraordinary kindness. The difficulty was that his definition of deserving was quite narrow, and it included very few people he had only just met. Miss Cordelia Vane arrived at Graving Hall on a Tuesday in October, which is the worst possible day of the week and the worst possible month of the year to arrive at a Northumberland estate for the first time. The moors are gray in October. The light fails by 4. The wind comes off the high ground with a kind of personal intention, as though it has singled you out specifically for discouragement. She arrived in the estate's second carriage, sent to collect her from the Alderwick coaching inn, with a trunk, a hat box, 3 cases of books, and an expression I can only describe as professionally composed. I was in the hall when she came in, having driven up from London the previous day to review the quarterly accounts, and I watched her take in Graving Hall with the careful, unhurried attention of someone cataloguing rather than admiring. She looked at the stone floors and the high plasterwork ceiling and the suit of armor in the corner that no one had dusted since the previous century, and her face said, large, cold, eccentric, manageable. She was 31 years old, a widow of 3 years. Her husband had been a schoolmaster in the South, a gentle man by all accounts who had left her with nothing but his books and his debts, which she had quietly settled by taking one position after another as a companion to ladies of varying degrees of difficulty. Lady Graving, Edmund's aunt, Lady Harriet, was not especially difficult. She was unwell, which is a different thing, and she wanted someone with a mind, not just a nursemaid. She had heard of Cordelia Vane through a mutual acquaintance and written to her directly, bypassing the usual agency channels, which I thought said something about Lady Harriet's character and something about Cordelia's reputation. Edmund was in the estate office when she arrived and did not come out to greet her. This was typical. He was not rude by intention. He simply operated on the principle that arrangements had been made, and arrivals and departures were managed by the housekeeper, and there was no reason to interrupt work. Mrs. Henley showed Miss Vane to her rooms, gave her an hour to settle, and took her up to Lady Harriet. I was present for that meeting. By chance, Lady Harriet had asked me to stay and take a note. I watched Cordelia Vane sit down across from a woman who had been slowly failing for 2 years, and I watched the first 5 minutes of that conversation, and I thought, she will be good at this. She did not speak loudly, the way people do to the unwell, as though illness affects hearing. She did not adopt the soft, treacly voice of practiced sympathy. She spoke in her ordinary register, clear, precise, with a dry edge to it that Lady Harriet clearly found restful. And within 10 minutes they were discussing the relative merits of 3 historians whose work Lady Harriet had been reading, and Lady Harriet had more color in her face than I had seen in a month. I filed this observation and went back to the accounts. The steward of Graven Hall was a man named Crispin Aldgate. He had been in the position for 4 years, appointed by Edmund during a period of significant estate overhaul, and he was, by all measurable indicators, competent. The accounts balanced. The tenants' rents came in. The maintenance schedules were met. He was a tall man, well-presented, agreeable in company, and he had a habit I noticed early but thought nothing of, a habit of making himself quietly indispensable to every room he entered. He knew things before they needed to be known. He appeared at doorways just before he was wanted. He had a particular attention, fine-grained and watchful, that could read as attentiveness and could read as something else, depending on the light. I noticed it, I thought nothing of it. He was a steward, attentiveness was his occupation. Cordelia Vane noticed it too, and thought a great deal of it. She said nothing at first. I know this because she told me later, carefully, that she spent the first 3 weeks simply watching. She wanted to be sure. She was not a woman who spoke before she was sure. In the 4th week, she came to the estate office during the afternoon, when I happened to be reviewing correspondence with Edmund, and asked if she might raise a concern. Edmund looked up from the letter he was reading and said, in his perfectly civil, perfectly distant way, "Yes." She sat down. She did not wait to be asked, which I noticed and Edmund noticed, and she said that she had observed some irregularities in the way Mr. Aldgate managed the household accounts. She had not been looking for them. Lady Harriet had asked her to review the housekeeping expenses because her eyesight was failing, and Cordelia had done so, and she had found several entries she could not reconcile. She laid a single sheet of paper on the desk. It had figures on it. The figures were neat, precise, and annotated in a clear, narrow hand. Edmund looked at it. He looked at it for long enough that I could see he was actually reading it, which was something. Then he said, "These are within normal variance for a house of this size." "Yes," she said, "individually, it's the pattern of them I found unusual." "What pattern?" She explained it. I will not reproduce the full explanation because it ran to some length and involved 3 years of quarterly figures that she had apparently committed to memory, but the substance of it was this. The small discrepancies never appeared in the same category twice in succession. They rotated. Linen this quarter, coal the next, garden supplies the next, small enough to be unremarkable, regular enough, in aggregate, to represent a very tidy sum across 3 years. Edmund listened. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Mr. Aldgate has managed these accounts for 4 years without irregularity." "With irregularity," she said. "Only a very regular irregularity which is harder to see." "Miss Vane," he was patient. I could hear the patience, which in Edmund always means he is containing something larger. "Mr. Aldgate came with exceptional references and has never in 4 years given me reason for concern. What you are describing is a hypothesis based on a pattern you have identified in figures you were reviewing as a housekeeping aid to my aunt. I will have my own man look at the accounts." "I would be glad of that," she said, without any sign that she found this insufficient. "Good." He turned back to his letter, which was the dismissal. She stood, gathered her single sheet of annotated figures. She did not leave it, which I thought was deliberate, and said, "Thank you for your time, Your Grace." "Of course," he said to the letter. I walked her to the door because I felt I should, and in the corridor I said, quietly, "I'll look at the figures myself. I manage the estate accounts from the London side. I'll pull the originals." She looked at me steadily. "I would be grateful, Mr. Strath," she said, and went back up the stairs. I looked at the figures. I found what she had found. I presented it to Edmund that evening, which was the second time in the same day I was the bearer of this particular concern, and he received it from me rather differently than he had received it from her, with immediate attention, a request for the relevant ledgers, and a decision to commission a formal audit, all within 20 minutes. I did not say, "Miss Vane told you this 3 hours ago." I thought it, I did not say it. The audit took 6 weeks. During those 6 weeks, Crispin Aldgate continued in his position, quietly, attentively, with his usual fine-grained watchfulness, and Cordelia Vane continued her duties as Lady Harriet's companion and said nothing more about it. I saw her once in that period in the library where she was reading to Lady Harriet, and once in the corridor outside the estate office, where she gave me a single inquiring look that I answered with a small nod, and she returned the nod and went on her way. She did not press. She had said what she had to say. It was in that 6 weeks that Aldgate, I believe, began to sense that something had changed. I do not know how. Perhaps Edmund's manner shifted by some fraction. Perhaps the audit itself, conducted by an outside man with ledger books and careful questions, was signal enough. Whatever the reason, 3 weeks into the audit I came down from London on a Tuesday, again, always the worst day of the week, to find that Aldgate had made a complaint about Miss Vane. Not to Edmund directly, to Mrs. Henley, who brought it to Edmund, which was the shape of it. The complaint was that Miss Vane had been making inquiries of the junior household staff that were outside her remit as Lady Harriet's companion, that she had asked one of the young footmen about the laundry arrangements in a way that seemed designed to gather information rather than to manage anything, that she had, in Aldgate's carefully worded account, a habit of intrusion into matters that do not concern a lady in her position. Edmund called her to the estate office again. This time I was not there. He told me about it afterwards, and I have reconstructed it from his account, and from what Cordelia told me much later, when we had become friends of the practical sort, which is the only sort either of us runs to. She came in. She sat down again without being asked. He told her that a concern had been raised about her conduct with the household staff. He told her, with the exact flatness he uses when he is being scrupulous about fairness, that he was giving her the opportunity to respond. She said, "I was asking the footman about the laundry arrangements because Lady Harriet has been concerned about the quality of her linen for several months. I was finding out whether the problem was in the laundering itself or in the purchasing. That is entirely within my remit." Edmund said, "That is a reasonable explanation." She said, "Is there another one being offered?" He looked at her for a moment. "Mr. Aldgate suggested your inquiries were of a broader kind." "Mr. Aldgate," she said, "is currently the subject of a financial audit. I imagine almost everything looks broad to him at present." Edmund was quiet. Then he said, "Miss Vane, I want to be plain with you. You arrived here 6 weeks ago. You raised a concern about a long-serving member of my staff in your first month. You are now the subject of a complaint from that same member of staff. I am not drawing a conclusion. I am noting a pattern." "You're noting my pattern," she said. "I noted his." "They are not equivalent." "No," she said. "Mine is real." I imagine there was a silence here. Edmund's silences have a quality not hostile, not cold, but very present, like a closed door. He said, "I am going to ask you to limit your interactions with the household staff to those directly relevant to Lady Harriet's care. This is not a judgment of your conduct. It is a practical measure during a period of some sensitivity." She said, "Of course, Your Grace." She stood. She gathered herself. She had no papers this time, nothing to gather, and so she simply stood and smoothed her skirt once, which I have since learned is what she does when she is making herself be still. "May I say one thing?" she asked. "Yes." "He knows you're looking," she said. "Whatever your audit finds, he has been warned. If there is anything he can move, he will have moved it by now." She left. He told me this at dinner that evening, and I said, "She's right, you know." He said, "I'm aware." And yet, he looked at his wine glass, "She has been here 6 weeks. 5.5, I said. "She found it in 4. He said nothing. The audit came back 3 weeks later. Aldgate had indeed moved things, but not everything. The pattern Cordelia had identified held across the pre-audit ledgers, and the auditor, who was a thorough man, traced it back further than she had and found it extended not 4 years but 6. The total, calculated across 6 years of rotating small discrepancies, was significant. Not catastrophic, Edmund could absorb it, but significant. And there were other things besides the money. There were letters found in Aldgate's rooms when the constables came that suggested a range of secondary arrangements. Information sold to a neighboring estate in a long-running land dispute, references forged for 2 previous positions, and a set of transactions involving a London merchant house that the constable said would require further examination, and which, in the end, did. Aldgate was removed. The constables took him on a Thursday. By Friday the estate felt different, lighter, somehow, though nothing had changed in the stone or the light or the 9 heated rooms. Edmund called Cordelia to the estate office a 3rd time. "I was there for this one." She sat down, she waited. He said, "The audit is concluded. The concerns you raised have proved well-founded, in full, and I owe you an acknowledgment of that." She said, "Thank you, Your Grace." He said, "I should also acknowledge that I managed this matter in a way that reflected poorly on my judgment. You raised a legitimate concern in your first month here, and I treated it as the product of an excitable imagination. I should not have." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You did send for your own man to look at the figures?" 3 hours after dismissing yours." "Yes." There was a pause. "Well," she said, "he looked at them." "Miss Vane." "And then you looked at them yourself, Mr. Strath tells me." I had said no such thing. I looked out the window. "I did," Edmund said. "Good," she said, with a tone that was not quite forgiving and not quite unforgiving. It was simply a woman who had been right about something and had waited without complaint for the world to catch up. She was not crowing. She was not exacting. She was merely present. Edmund said, "I hope you will remain at Graving. Lady Harriet values your company greatly, and I would consider it a significant loss if you chose to leave on account of how this has been handled." She looked at him for a moment. The first time, I think, that she looked at him directly, without the professional composure arranged in front of whatever she was actually thinking. It lasted perhaps 2 seconds. Then she said, "I'll stay for Lady Harriet." "Of course," he said. "That was not an implicit condition, Your Grace. I meant it plainly. I'm staying for her." He said, "I understand." She left. I looked at Edmund. He was looking at the door. "She's telling you not to take credit," I said. I understood what she meant. "Good," I said, "she meant it." He gave me a look. I found the accounts absorbing and said nothing else. The winter at Graving was the long kind, snow in November, and then again in January, and the moors under a flat gray sky for weeks at a time with no variation except the angle of the cold. Lady Harriet worsened and then steadied and then worsened again, in the way that illness moves when it is not going to turn back. Cordelia managed the sickroom with the same quality I had noted from the first, clear, unhurried, genuinely present, without the performed devotion that makes the healthy feel better and the sick feel managed. Edmund, who visited his aunt daily during this period, encountered Cordelia Vane approximately once per day as a consequence. I observed this from a distance. I was in and out of Graving that winter, 3 trips down from London to manage the post-audit estate reorganization, and I developed the habit, during this period, of watching Edmund and Cordelia occupy the same room. It was instructive. They did not exactly argue. They were too careful for that, he because he was a duke who had been wrong about something she had been right about, and she because she was a companion in his household with clear professional limits. But they debated. They disagreed. They had the sort of conversations that look, on the surface, like perfectly civil exchanges about books or management practices, or the logistics of moving Lady Harriet's chair nearer the fire, and that are, on a somewhat deeper surface, the sound of two very particular minds pushing against each other and finding, to their mutual confusion, that the resistance is interesting. I watched him watch her when she was not looking. I watched her not watch him with what I can only describe as pointed peripheral awareness. I thought, this is going to be complicated. I was right. I usually am about other people's complications. It is a consolation for having very few of one's own. Lady Harriet died in March. It was a Sunday, just before dawn, and it was quiet. Cordelia had been with her through the night, and I believe Edmund had come in around 4 in the morning and sat by the window without speaking, which is the most he can offer in those moments, and which, in the right circumstances, is enough. Lady Harriet had always understood Edmund better than most. I think she found his presence sufficient. Afterwards, Cordelia gave notice. She did not make it dramatic. She went to Mrs. Henley and said that her position had been as companion to Lady Harriet, and Lady Harriet was gone, and she would need 2 weeks to arrange her things. Edmund, when he found out, went to find her. I know this because I happened to be crossing the upper corridor at the relevant moment, and heard the exchange through a partially open door, which I am not ashamed of. He said, "I had hoped you would stay." She said, "Stay as what?" There was a pause. "You could take on other management duties. The household has been without proper internal oversight since Aldgate. You have Mrs. Henley and your auditor, your Grace. You found what neither of them found." "Yes," she said. "And I was nearly removed from the house for doing it." He said, "I owe you a more complete apology than I gave you." She said, "You owe me nothing. You acknowledged the error, I accepted it. We are square." "That's not," he stopped, "Miss Vane. Mr. Strath tells me there is a small press in Alderwick that is looking for a bookkeeper. I have written to inquire. It suits me very well." "A press in Alderwick," he said, and there was something in his voice I had never heard before. Not quite dismay. Something quieter than dismay. Something that had not been there long enough to have a name yet. "Yes," she said, "I prefer to be in town. You have been in this house for 5 months. And I have valued them. Lady Harriet was," she paused, "she was very good to me. But my position here is concluded." He said, "I am asking you to stay." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I know, I appreciate it, but I think, Your Grace, that what you are actually asking me to do is to remain in your household on an indefinite basis in a capacity that hasn't been defined, because it is convenient to have someone on the premises who is good at finding things. And I am better than that." There was a silence. "Yes," he said, "you are." She left 2 weeks later on a Tuesday. She took her trunk and her hat box and her 3 cases of books, and the second carriage took her to Alderwick, and I watched Edmund not watch the carriage from the estate office window, which is the sort of thing you can do when a man has his back to you, and he has no idea you are observing anything at all. He did not say anything. He turned back to his desk. He picked up a letter. He put it down again. I found something very interesting in the accounts and said nothing. She had been at the Alderwick Press for 3 months when the first letter arrived at Graving Hall. She had written it to Edmund, addressed to him directly, not through me, and I only know about it because he showed it to me himself, which tells you something. It was a professional letter, short and clear. She had identified what she thought was an inconsistency in the title registration of the eastern parcel of Graving land, which abutted the Alderwick Press's own property records, and she thought he ought to know. If he wished to investigate, she provided 3 references and a suggested course of action. If he did not, she wished him well. He read it to me, and then he looked at me and I said, "She's done it again." "She has," he said. "Are you going to respond?" He looked at the letter. He looked at it for quite a long time. Then he put it in his desk drawer. "I'll have the land records reviewed," he said. "That's not what I asked." He said the land records ought to be reviewed regardless. "Edmund." He looked up. I had used his first name, which I do only in private and only when I mean something serious. "She left," he said. "She made her position clear." "She wrote to you?" "About a land registration." "She wrote to you," I said again. He closed the drawer. "Review the land records," he said, and picked up another letter. The land records yielded a genuine problem, a registration error from 30 years ago that could, if uncorrected, have created difficulty in any future transfer of the eastern parcel. It took 4 months to resolve. It would have taken much longer to discover without her letter. He did not write back. The second letter arrived in September. Again professional, again precise, again addressed to him directly. This time she had found, through her work at the press, that a man recently arrived in Alderwick was representing himself as a surveyor with authority to conduct assessments of properties on the Graven estate's behalf, and she had reason to believe this was not accurate. She attached the details, offered to speak to the constable herself if he preferred, and signed it, Cordelia Vane. He read it. He investigated. The man was, in fact, nothing of the kind. He was associated with the same neighboring estate involved in Aldgate's information sales, and there were implications that were eventually resolved through the same constable who had taken Aldgate away. It was not a small matter. Edmund did not write back. The third letter came in November. I was at Graving when it arrived. I watched Edmund open it, read it, and this time he did not put it in the drawer. He held it for a moment, and then he looked at me, and his expression had something in it that I had not seen before and could not quite read. The third letter was brief. It said, "Your Grace, I have now sent 2 letters that proved useful, and you have responded to neither. I understand this is consistent, as a matter of form, with the difference in our positions. I raise it only because if there is a future occasion on which something I notice seems worth your attention, I would like to know whether I should trouble you with it or spare us both. Yours sincerely, Cordelia Vane." I said, "She is tired of being useful to someone who won't speak to her." He said, "I know what she means." "Edmund, go and see her." He was quiet for a long time. Outside, the November wind was doing what it does at Graving, coming off the moors with personal intention. He said, "She made herself quite clear about what she wanted when she left. She made herself clear about what she did not want. That's different from what she wants." "And what does she want?" I said, "I expect she wants to be treated like a person you respect, rather than a useful instrument you have forgotten to thank." He said nothing. "Write back," I said. He did not write back. He was not, I had come to understand, a man who found writing easy in the particular way that this letter required writing. He could produce lucid, clear, decisive correspondence about land records and estate management and the 17 other matters that crossed his desk every week. He could not, apparently, produce a lucid and clear letter to Cordelia Vane that said, "I am sorry I did not write. I am sorry for how I managed things in the autumn. I have thought about you every week since you left, and I would like very much to speak to you." He could not write it because he could not, yet, say it even to himself. In January, he went to Alderwick. I know because he told me he was going on a routine visit to the estate solicitor's local office, which was true, and I knew, and he knew that I knew, that the Alderwick Press was 3 streets from the solicitor's office, and that he had a letter in his inside coat pocket that he had drafted and rewritten 4 times before folding it and deciding to deliver it himself. He delivered himself instead. He arrived at the press, asked for Miss Vane, and was told by the young man at the counter that she was in the back and could he say who was calling. And Edmund said, "An acquaintance," which is the most useless word in the English language when you are trying to communicate something. She came out, she saw him. She said, "Your Grace." He said, "Miss Vane, I was in Alderwick for a legal matter and thought I would. I came to respond to your third letter." She said, "It was sent in November." "Yes," he said, "I am aware." She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "Would you like to come through to the office?" He said he would. He told me about what followed afterwards on the drive back to Graven Hall. He told it carefully, the way a man tells a thing he is still working out what to feel about. She had offered him a chair in a small, book-filled office that smelled of ink and paper and the particular cold of a Northumberland January. She had sat across from him. She had folded her hands on the desk, which he described in some detail, which I found significant, and waited. He had produced the letter which he had intended to hand her, but he had written it before he came, and the distance between what it said and what he actually wanted to say had become, in the interval, uncomfortable. So he held it and said instead, "You asked whether you should continue to trouble me with things you notice. The answer is yes. I should have said so in September, or in July when you first wrote. I should have responded. I didn't, and I can offer you a reason, but I suspect you'll find it insufficient." She said, "Tell me the reason." He said, "I wasn't sure what to say." She was quiet. Then she said, "That is the most honest thing you have said to me since I arrived at Graven Hall." He said, "I hope not." "It comes close," she said. "What would you have said if you'd worked it out?" He had no good answer to this. He was silent long enough that she said calmly, "It's all right, you don't have to answer." He said, "No, I'm trying." He looked at his hat, which he was holding in both hands. "What I would have said is that you were right about Aldgate from the start, and I handled it badly and you left, which was the reasonable response, and I have thought about it since." "Since when?" she said. "Since you left." She said nothing. He said, "I don't know what I'm asking. I'm aware of that, but I would like to continue." He stopped. "I am making this worse." "No," she said carefully, "you are making it clearer." He looked up. She said, "You want me to come back to Graven?" He stopped again. "Yes, in some capacity." "What capacity?" He held the letter. He said, "I don't know how to say this without it sounding like I'm offering you a position." She said, "Then say it without saying it." He looked at her for a long moment. "You are the sharpest person I have ever had in that house," he said, "and the most honest and the most difficult to ignore. And I have spent 5 months ignoring you very poorly, as the 3 unanswered letters indicate." She was quiet. "That is not saying it without saying it." "No," he agreed. "You're saying I was useful." "I'm saying I have not found anyone since who looks at a room the way you do, or who will sit in my estate office and tell me I am wrong in the same breath as your Grace." She looked at him steadily. "I told you once," she said. "You sent your own man 3 hours later. He found what you found. From figures I gave him." "Yes," he said, "I know." He was holding the letter very still. "I am not good at this." "What is this?" He said, "Telling someone something that matters." She looked at him. The office was very quiet. The press was running somewhere behind the walls, a low, rhythmic sound, steady and mechanical. She said, "You came to Alderwick for a legal matter." "Yes." "And to deliver a letter." "Yes." "Which you didn't deliver." "No." "Because you decided to say it instead." "Yes." He looked up. "Poorly." Something crossed her face, something that was not quite a smile, and was a great deal warmer than what had been there before. She said, "Poorly enough that I understand you completely." He was quiet. She said, "I'm not coming back to Graven, Your Grace." "No," he said, "I know. I like it here, I like the press, I like having my own work. She paused. I did not like the way I left Graven Hall. No, he said. You ought not to have been put in the position of leaving it. I was put in several positions. I ought not to have been put in. Yes, she said, and you are here to what correct that? He looked at the hat in his hands. I am here, he said slowly, to ask if you would consider beginning again, from the start. Without the household, and without the position, and without me being an idiot about the figures. The press ran its steady rhythm in the walls. She said, beginning what? He said, whatever you'd like. She was quiet for what felt, by his account, like a very long time. Then she said, you'll have to do better than that, Your Grace. He said, I know. Starting again implies I have some sense of where we're going. As do I, he looked at her. I believe I do. Believe, she said, is careful. It is. And yet you drove to Alderwick. Yes. In January. The roads were navigable. She looked at him, and this time the thing that crossed her face was definite. It was a smile, and it was the specific smile of a woman who has been watching a very proud man argue himself into a corner and is finding it privately satisfying. She said, I will think about it. He said, that is more than I expected. Good, she said. Low expectations have been your strongest quality in this matter. He stood. He had not delivered the letter. He put it in his pocket where it remained. She walked him to the door of the press. He put on his hat. He said, I'll be in Alderwick again next month. For legal matters, she said. Yes, he said, and looked at her once more and went. He came back in February and in March. In February, she offered him a chair in the office, and they talked for an hour and a half about matters that were not, as far as I can determine, directly related to estate management or land registration or anything practical at all. They talked about what they were reading, which was the same historian, and about the Eastern parcel situation, which was resolved, and about something she had found in the press archives that related to a family connected to the Graving estate 3 generations back, and which she thought he might find interesting. He did find it interesting. He stayed until it was nearly dark, and the press's young man had looked in at the office door twice with the expression of someone who is not sure what is happening, but suspects it is something. In March the snow came back late and mean and unexpected, the way Northumberland snow always is. He arrived on a Thursday, which is a better day than Tuesday, and they walked. This surprised me when he told me, because Edmund is not a man who walks without purpose, and the purpose here was ambiguous. They walked the path along the cliff-top above Alderwick, a gray, cold, windy walk with the sea below and the moors behind, which is exactly the kind of walk you take when you have something to say and are not yet sure how to say it. She had a good coat, he told me. He noticed this. He noticed also that she walked briskly and without complaint, which he found. He used the word restful, which, from Edmund, means something closer to profoundly appealing. They talked about the press's legal standing, which had some quirks she'd identified. They talked about Lady Harriet briefly, which was the first time either of them had spoken of her since March the previous year, and which required, on both their parts, a certain steadiness. They talked about where she had been before Graving, the string of positions, the years of work, the schoolmaster husband and his books, and she spoke about it with the direct, unhurried quality she brought to everything. And he listened, which was something she did not take for granted. And then the path narrowed at the cliff edge, where the wind was sharpest, and she slipped. It was a small slip. The path was icy at that point, a narrow strip of frozen mud over rock, and she caught herself, but not quite, and Edmund caught her, his hand on her arm, and they stopped. She was fine, she had not been near the edge, but they had stopped and he had not let go. She said, "Thank you." He said, "Of course." He did not let go immediately. She did not pull away. Below them the sea was dark and very cold, and the wind was doing its best. Above them, the sky had the flat white quality that means more snow coming. They stood on the cliff path in a Northumberland January. It was still January in the weather, if not the calendar, and he was holding her arm, and she was looking at him, and something had changed in the quality of the silence. He said, "I have been coming to Alderwick once a month." "Yes," she said. "For 3 months." "Yes." "I should tell you," he said, "that I have not found a legal matter requiring my personal attention on any of those visits." She said, "I know." He was quiet. "You know. Mr. Strath told me in November that you had drafted my response 4 times before coming in person. He tells me things he thinks I ought to know." She paused. "I should perhaps tell you that Mr. Strath is the reason I knew you read the 3rd letter yourself. He mentioned it in passing." "I had in fact mentioned it deliberately. I have no regrets." Edmund said, "Oliver. He's very fond of you," she said. "He is managing what he considers an unfortunate situation." "It is not unfortunate." "No," she said, "it isn't." She looked at him. "You could have written any of the 3 times." "Yes." "You could have said something in January." "I said several things in January." "You said that you had not found anyone who looked at a room the way I did." "That was the substance of it." She said, "And now?" He looked at her. The wind was very loud. Below them the sea moved in long gray swells. He said, "I was wrong about Aldgate. I was wrong about the letters. I was wrong about many things in the 6 months you were at Graving." He paused. "You were right about all of them." "I know," she said simply. "Yes," he said, "you do." There was no irony in it. "I have spent a considerable amount of time this winter thinking about what it means to be the sort of man who needed to be told by his own solicitor before he would act on what you told him directly." He looked at the sea. "It means several things, none of them comfortable." She said, "What things?" "That I trust data more than people. That I trust men more than women, or I did, without examining it. That I was given a clear and correct piece of information by someone I had known for 4 weeks, and I found a reason not to act on it. And the reason was that she was new, and not in a position I recognized, and I hadn't yet made room for her." She was quiet for a moment. "And have you made room?" He looked at her. "Yes," he said, "a very large room as it turns out." The sea moved below them. The sky pressed down, white and cold. She said, "If you're going to say something, Your Grace, you should say it before the snow." He said, "Cordelia." He had not used her name before. Not once in all the months, in all the meetings, in the estate office and the sick-room corridor, and the 3 visits to Alderwick. He had always said Miss Vane, with the precision of someone who is keeping their distance with one hand and wanting to close it with the other. She looked at him. He said, "I would very much like to court you if you are willing, properly, openly. I am not asking you to come back to Graving in any capacity other than the one you would choose. I am asking if you would let me come to Alderwick and speak to you, and stop conducting conversations about land registration when what I actually want to talk about is you." She was quiet. The snow, when it came gently at first, the kind that falls in large, unhurried flakes, more like something settling than something falling. She said, "You dismissed me in front of the household." "Yes," he said. "I did." "And then you restricted my movements in the house." "Yes." "And then you didn't write." 3 times. 3 times, she agreed. She was looking at him with an expression I wish I had been there to see, though I'm recording it as he described it to me, which means I am trusting his account of his own defeat, which is usually quite accurate because Edmund is nothing if not honest when the accounting has been done. "You came in January," she said. "Yes." "With a letter." "Yes." "Which you didn't give me." "No." "Because you decided to say it instead." "Poorly." She said, "And now you've said it properly." He said, somewhat more properly. She looked at him. The snow was falling in earnest now, settling on her coat and on his shoulders and on the cliff path where they were standing, and the sea was gray and vast below them, and the moors were white and wide behind, and she looked at him for a long time with those clear, direct eyes that had looked at 3 years of quarterly figures, and found the thing no one else found. She said, "You're going to have to be very patient." He said, "I am aware. I am not easy to know." "No," he said, with the first thing that was not quite a smile but was adjacent to one. "I had noticed. And I will tell you when you are wrong. I expect nothing less. And I will not," she said carefully, "tell you what you want to hear simply because you are a duke." "I would find that actively distressing," he said. She looked at him. The smile, when it came, was small and warm and entirely her own, not the professional composure, not the dry precision, but the thing underneath it, which I think very few people had been given the occasion to see. She said, "Then yes." He said, "Yes. Yes, your grace, you may court me, in Alderwick, at a reasonable pace, with honest conversation and no more letters that go unanswered." "None," he said. "I swear it." She said, "And no more referring to my observations as the product of an excitable imagination." "I never said that." She looked at him. "I thought it," he admitted. "I thought it very loudly." "I know," she said. "I could hear it." He said, "I'm sorry." She said, "I know that too." They stood on the cliff path in the snow, his hand still on her arm, and below them the sea moved in long cold swells and the sky settled white and steady, and it was, by Edmund's account and by the evidence of everything that followed, the beginning of something that had been working its way toward this point for a long time. Since the first morning she had sat down in his estate office without being asked, since the sheet of annotated figures, since the curtsy and no drama departure, since the 3 letters that went into the drawer. He did not let go of her arm. She did not require him to. They walked back to Alderwick together, into the snow. They were engaged in June. It was not a dramatic engagement. He did not produce a ring in a public place, or make a speech, or perform the thing before an audience. He came to the press on a Thursday, and they walked to the small garden behind the solicitor's office that has a bench facing south, and he asked her, and she said yes, and they sat on the bench for some time in what I imagine was a remarkable silence, the good kind. He wrote to me that evening. The letter was 1 sentence long. She said yes. I wrote back, "Took you long enough." He did not reply to this, which I found satisfying. They were married in September, a quiet ceremony in the Alderwick church, which is small and old, and has a window on the south side that lets in a remarkable amount of light for a Northumberland building. I was there. Mrs. Henley came down from Graving and wept in the way that decent people do at decent weddings. The press staff sent a card, which Cordelia kept. Graven Hall, in the months after she moved in, changed in ways that are difficult to describe precisely. Nothing dramatic, no renovation, no new furnishings. The 9 heated rooms became 11. The roses on the south wall were finally addressed, not because she asked for it, but because she found a gardener who understood them. And Edmund, who had called them an embarrassment for 4 years, turned out to have strong opinions about the best pruning approach, and they had a lengthy discussion about it that I gather was one of the better discussions they had had, which tells you something about both of them. She kept an office in the press. Edmund went to Alderwick on Thursdays. The solicitor, I am told, has given up trying to understand the timing of these visits and has simply adjusted his diary accordingly. The estate accounts, in the first full year after their marriage, showed 0 irregularities. Not because a new steward had been appointed, though one had, a very competent woman named Mrs. Croft, who had run her family's shipping ledgers for a decade, and about whom Cordelia had written to Edmund 6 months before they were engaged with the observation that she would be an excellent appointment. He had made it immediately, which she had noted at the time as an improvement. "You wrote back," she had said when she thanked him. "I had learned my lesson," he said. "About writing back." "About most things," he said. "You were the best teacher I ever had." She had looked at him with the expression I had first seen in the estate office, that 2-second look, direct and real, before the professional composure could reassemble itself. And then she had said, in the dry, precise voice that I have come to think of as her truest register, "You were not the worst student." From Cordelia Vane, that is as close to a declaration as you are likely to get. Edmund understood this perfectly. I have no doubt that he treasures it. I have known Edmund Farrell for more than 20 years. I have managed his affairs through inheritance and estate overhaul and fraud and legal complications I will not bore you with, and I have watched him be a very capable, very controlled, very guarded man who was right about nearly everything and wrong, for a period of 5 months, about exactly one thing, and spent the next 2 years working out what it had cost him and earning it back. He is a better man for it. She would not say so. She would say, in the precisely calibrated way she has, that he is a man who was capable of being better and found the occasion for it, which amounts to the same thing and is more accurate, and is the sort of remark that makes me understand completely why he drove to Alderwick in January. She was right in the end about everything. As far as I can tell, she usually is. He knows this. He knew it before the audit and after it and on the cliff path in the snow. He has known it, I think, since she sat down in his estate office without being asked and laid a sheet of annotated figures on his desk and waited, with perfect composure, for him to catch up. The orangery at Graven Hall, which Lady Harriet used to sit in, and which Edmund never changed after her death, though he told no one why, has a reading chair in it now. 2 of them. They face south, toward the unpruned roses that are pruned now and the long moors and the particular Northumberland sky. They are both usually occupied.